Welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. My name is Meagan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. So we are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. We both love and respect our kids. True story?
Yes, absolutely.
It'd be a really interesting episode if you were like, I'm having second thoughts.
I tell him all the time that I've decided to keep him. So yeah, we're good there.
Okay, we both love homeschooling. Also true, right?
Yep.
Okay. But we're never going to show up here and portray this image that is like sunshine and rainbows 24/7. Some days are hard, worth it, but hard. And we believe in just putting the truth out there. So at least you don't feel alone or you know what you're getting into or whatever the case might be.
No, absolutely. So true. All right. So here you can expect secular progressive views. It can be super hard to find your people in homeschool circles if you believe crazy things like trans rights and women's rights are in fact human rights. Vaccines save lives. Ooh. Common sense gun laws are long overdue. And that, things like DEI make our society stronger.
True story, which really ties into our current book club pick as well, right? Which those episodes come out on Tuesdays, but yeah.
On Thursdays.
Oh yeah,
those episodes come out on Thursdays.
Thursdays.
It's a day. We're recording. We're going to make this work. Okay. Just stick with us.
It's happening. So I don't know about you, but I find it positively exhausting to have to fix my face when I'm in general homeschool circles where the opposite of those values are just being blurted out. And we are not about that. So in keeping with our values, we are going to be talking about privilege today. And boy, is there a lot to unpack when it comes to privilege. Anybody who stumbled across our podcast by accident who does not share our values just started twitching when I mentioned privilege, right? They're like, "Whoa." But before we dive in, we start all of our episodes with a recap of our weeks in the spirit of keeping it real. So how's your week been, Amanda?
My week. So I'm okay. If you've been listening, if you're following along kind of in real time, you know that we had an amazing world schooling adventure for the first bit of the year. And I'm really struggling health-wise. Like I'm just not back to my baseline before we went on our trip. That remains true. And we had a trip booked to San Francisco for this week. And we went ahead and kept it for better or worse. And so we're here. I'm not 100% okay, but we're going to make it work. Things with the kid have been good, right? We're doing well in that regard. One of the big motivators for coming to San Francisco was to see my extended family on my husband's side, my in-law side, and they have refused to see us. So that's made the trip a little challenging, right? For many of the reasons and the things that we say here on our podcast and that we hold dear and true on our podcast. And so for anyone who's listening and you're thinking like, how do these ladies have it all together? And all of the people in their corner support this progressive view and they're so, open and accepting, like, I think this is one of those opportunities to really point out, like, we're just like you, like we're like other people who are, like we're standing in the face of our beliefs and we're supporting our kids the best that we can. And not everyone in our circles feel the same way. And sometimes that's a real bummer, like those conversations aren't fun to have with your kids. They aren't fun to have with your spouse or your partner, right? None of these things are fun. So yeah, that's where we're at. And we're just making do. We're shifting some things around and having fun and just making the most of it. I used to live in San Francisco for a little while. So it's fun to be back here. And, we were able to meet up with some friends and things like that. When other plans fell through, we were able to make some last minute plans with people who were willing to shuffle and shift things to actually see us when we're in town. So that's been good at least. And yeah, San Francisco's a great city, right? We talked a little before on here. My family, we still mask to avoid illness, COVID and other things. And it's been nice being in San Francisco. So many people here still mask. We went to the museum and I would say like half of the staff had masks on and like really good masks, and like,
Right.
It's been nice. And just the inclusion in the city as a whole and stuff. Like San Diego's got a lot going for it. Those things are not necessarily, but it's got going for it. So it's been a nice change of pace. So yeah, that's what we've got going on. How about you guys? A little bit of a a different week for you.
Yeah, it's been busy. I will say though, to your point about relatives, thankfully I don't get much flat. I know there's a huge contingency that do not agree, and I'm like, that's fine. We just don't go there. And they're not people I talk to on a daily basis, so it's all good. But it was funny because after the big meeting with Zelensky at the White House, I posted an I stand with Ukraine, like a lot of people did, right? And this relative of my husband like comes out of the woodwork, somebody I never talked to, doesn't live in the US, to my knowledge, isn't a US citizen. And if they are, they're a birthright citizen, which I'm not claiming is not real citizenship. My husband is a birthright citizen, but has never lived in the US, doesn't vote in the US, doesn't pay taxes in the US, and decided to come at me and used the wrong there like 3 times in their attack. It was just like, we're done here. Like, block. I said to my husband, just so you know, I did this thing. He's like, yeah, that's fine. Nobody really chats with that person anyway. I was like, okay, just letting you know I might have caused some problems in the family tree. And he's like, no, nobody's gonna care. So my 17-year-old left for Greece and Turkey. He's in Greece now. I'm assuming he's alive and well. Haven't heard from him. I did get I landed in Athens. That was the end of it. I haven't heard from him since. So
Don't look for the request for selfies, right?
I did talk to him about the fact that the last time he went on a really long trip and he only ever called me when something was bothering him. I shared what that did to me and how stressed it made me, because then when I wasn't hearing from him, I was like, is he having a good time? And that was just a blip. And that's why he called, or like, so I just said, like, I'm not even, he's a really introverted, very, very self-contained is not the right word. Like, it's hard to get a lot of like emotion or whatever. Like, one day I sent him something and he replied, yay, with an exclamation point. And I took a screenshot and sent it to my mom. And I was like, look how excited he is. Like, that's very demonstrative for him. That's just his personality. And so I was like, I'm not even going to be so bold as to ask for a phone call. But like every once in a while, if you could just send me like, had a great day, I'm off to bed. So that way, if you do get upset and you call me, it's not the only time I hear from you for 6 weeks. That would be amazing. So far, not so good. We're on day 4. And I do know he's alive because the trip host has posted 2 photos, but that's about it. So that's okay. I didn't have high hopes. I will say that. So whatever I get, I'll be grateful for. My 15-year-old is actually getting ready to head home. Her train is in about a half an hour, so don't be surprised if there's an interruption when I have to answer the phone at some point. She went to the other side of England, to Whitstable, for a weaving conference, stayed with a host family, had an awesome week. She calls me every night and gives me a full digest of her day, what she did, who she talked to, what she ate, like totally different kids. And so it's just been me and my 13-year-old, and we've been hanging out and kind of cracking ourselves up. And it's been all that. We go back to Portugal on Monday, which I'm pretty pumped about. So we've been trying to get laundry done here, and we were house sitting. So we have to clean up the house, turn over our linens, like all that kind of stuff. So we're just kind of in that mode. And I will say, speaking of privilege, I'm a shit housekeeper. Like, I'm absolutely terrible at it. I married a foreigner who thinks it's quite typical that everyone has a housekeeper all the time. He has no concept. And so we've always had a housekeeper. That to him is just like a standard household expense. And I have not done anything to dissuade him from that.
I wouldn't be there. I'd hold on to that as long as you can, right?
Right, exactly. And so I'm not good at cleaning. I have very low confidence when it comes to my ability to do a good job. So I'm a little stressed about it, but we're going to get it done. It's going to be okay. Yeah. So last week I was having a massive panic. If you listen to last week's episode, I was kind of starting on a spiral of like, maybe I have a brain tumor. And really only yesterday have I like gotten to the point where I can breathe a little bit again. It was like an exhausting 4 or 5 days of me having a terrible headache and stress and not really being able to take a deep breath. And I had to minimize some of my news consumption to get back to kind of breathing again. But it's getting a little bit better. So I'm sticking with it, and hopefully it'll continue. So we'll get there.
Seems to be, yeah, that seems to be trending, right? I was worried we weren't going to be able to podcast this morning because like I said, I've not been feeling well. And I had such a big day yesterday that I woke up this morning without much voice. And also I hadn't done any preparations for today's podcast. And I just planned things poorly. And I was trying to do it last night and I was literally falling asleep while trying to do it. So I woke up this morning at like 6:30, which is really early in my world.
Yeah.
And went and sat in the bathroom, on the floor in the bathroom, wrapped in a towel because it was cold, and sat in the bathroom and did my reading and my notes while the rest of my family continued to sleep. So I'm here.
That's dedication.
My voice is mostly back. So we'll see how 3 hours of podcasting goes, but here we are.
Oh, we've got this. P.S. This episode will not be 3 hours long. We record multiples at once.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, wouldn't that be awful? Like, people are like, wow, they have a lot to say about privilege.
I mean, we do. We could be here all week, but we're not going to record it and make you listen to it.
So yes, that is our topic for today. We are going to dive in. So I don't know if you've seen the specific one. There's one that I pulled. Amanda, have you seen this one? I just saw it last week in the Homeschooling in Michigan group. It was a quote that said, "Homeschoolers are not rich. We are not showing our privilege," and they have that in quotes, which I always find that as kind of like a mocking use of the quotes. "We are not showing our privilege. In my 40 years in the homeschool community, the majority of families I've known have made choices to live on one income, smaller homes, used cars, thrifted clothes, fewer meals out, used books. It's a deliberate choice." And that is a quote by Nikki Truesdell. Have you seen that one that floats around?
I haven't seen that specific quote, but I mean, I don't think you can be in any homeschooling groups and not see this come up on the regular, really.
Yeah, right. And it always kicks off a firestorm of debate about if it is or isn't privilege. So we're going to start to unpack that today. But first, I was a little bit curious about the author of that quote.
Yeah, so who is good old Nikki, you might ask? She says, quote, we pulled this directly, so we're being very fair here. Christian, wife, mother of 2 sons and 3 daughters, author, blogger, speaker, and book lover, 2nd-generation homeschooler. Then it goes on to say, this blog has been my space to share all things Christian parenting, homeschooling, and conservative issues since 2009. I believe, again, this is Nikki talking, I believe in bold truth-telling, biblical womanhood, and discipleship parenting.
With a lot to unpack there. She wrote a book called Anyone Can Homeschool, which reminded me, I had like a little moment. I remember when I went to birthing classes when I was pregnant for the first time, there was this whole anyone can breastfeed thing. P.S. I could not breastfeed. I tried and tried for months. I mean, and La Leche was involved and more people touched my boobs than I can even count, right? Like just trying to figure out how to get this to happen and made all these changes. And P.S. I could not breastfeed. Well, so this anyone can homeschool thing has that same ring to it for me.
Exactly. No, I totally hate that because I was not in the same boat, but I was in a situation where it was like breastfeeding was not medically advised, right? Like my medical team did not think it was a good idea. They did not advocate for it. They very much supported me in not doing it in a time where it was breast is best all over the place, right? And so like, yeah, I'm not about these. Yeah.
Yeah, it really, and it set me up for a psychological hot mess because it was like everyone can do it except me now because of the way it had been worded.
Well, and you have to fight so hard, right? You have to fight so hard for like, my situation is different and like, you don't get to judge me for that. But people 100% feel like they get to judge you.
Yeah. And I think for me, like either way, it's hard. It's not to say one's worse than the other, but I think when it comes to breastfeeding, if you've chosen not to, you're like fighting the good fight. But I desperately wanted to. And so the fact that I couldn't was I was devastated.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's safe to say that our viewpoint varies a bit from Nikki Truesdell. So let's start off with just in general, what does it mean to have privilege? Why is it so misunderstood? And yeah, let's start there. What does it mean to have privilege and why is it so often misunderstood by people? How do you think of privilege when you define it, Amanda?
Privilege for me is that idea that like the system is inherently set up to help you succeed. It is inherently set up for your benefit. And that doesn't mean that it's not hard. It doesn't mean that you didn't have to make sacrifices. It doesn't mean that everything came easy. It means that the system itself isn't designed in a way to make it harder for you. That's how I think of as privilege in general. And, you know, if you're not watching our video, if you're not pretty familiar with us, right? We're 2 white women. Like we're going to own that. We're not going to sit here and pretend like we're anything else. And so, you know, I mean, as a woman, you lack a lot more things now than you did just 10 or 15 years ago. But as a white woman, you have a lot more privilege than any other woman, especially in the United States. And as a white person in general, you've got a lot more privilege. I absolutely use my white privilege in certain circumstances and situations to try to help protect my spouse and my child who are not white and not white presenting. So yeah, for me, that's what it is. How would you describe it? I'm sure you have some other ideas or parameters around it.
Yeah, I mean, quite similar. The idea that you've got an advantage that someone else might not have, whether it's systemic or whatever the case might be, all true about women. I mean, when you talk about your childhood and when I talk about my childhood, there's a difference in privilege that both you and I experienced growing up. There's that video that goes around. Have you ever seen it where everybody kind of starts on the starting line and then they say, if you've never gone to bed hungry, take one step forward. If you've never had your phone turned off for non-payment, take one step forward. If you graduated without college debt, take one step forward. And by the end, you had some people that were still on the starting line, and then you had a staggering of people that had moved forward, right? So it's not to say that somebody who was in the middle of the pack didn't have to work hard. It's not to say the person at the very front of the pack didn't have to work hard, but it's just to say that everybody's journey is different. And where you were standing on that lineup when it was done just kind of showed what obstacles you had to overcome versus other people in regard to the criteria that had been set out in that video. I think the thing about the misunderstanding is that it downplays the struggle. That because maybe my childhood was more privileged than your childhood, does that mean, is that insulting towards me that I never had to work hard, that I never had to work for anything? Of course not. I mean, I worked hard too, but it does definitely speak loudly to the accomplishments that somebody who did not have certain privileges that I had was able to accomplish, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the issue that often comes up. I'm not going to say that your accomplishments mean less because you started out with a bit more privilege, from childhood or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, I'm not going to be the ass that looks at someone and is like, well, I had more privilege than you, but I struggled just as hard as you to make this exact same achievements or accomplishments. Like, it's my responsibility to be aware of that. I worked hard to get where I was, and I had to overcome certain things. I definitely came from a very working class family, and my parents worked really hard to help us achieve what we did. And there are all of those things, choices and things that were made. But at the same time, I also know that I came into that with a level of privilege. Again, I am white. I'm from the middle class. Come from the Midwest. There are a lot of things. I don't have an accent that people judged me on. There are just a lot of things that I had, and I have to be aware of that at the same time that I am proud of myself for the accomplishments that I achieved. And there's awareness. Like, there's nothing wrong with self-awareness.
So can homeschooling be a privilege and a sacrifice at the same time? What do you think?
I don't think there's any getting around the fact that being able to homeschool, like even being able to homeschool it is a privilege. There are plenty of people and families that for a wide variety of reasons, they can't. Whether that's because they live in a place where it's just legally not allowed, whether they are in a situation where they don't have any family close by and they can't get any help and they have to work two jobs, a full-time job and a part-time job to make ends meet. And they're just, literally there's no way for them to be able to be there with their kids to homeschool. And their kids are young enough. They have to be in a school for the care so that they're not taken away because they're not there providing for them. There's a whole bunch of reasons where people who might not be able to do that. Obviously, homeschooling is a privilege. And anyone who's going to, you shouldn't be listening to our podcast. You're not part of our people. If you're like, there's no way homeschooling is a privilege. But at the same time, a lot of us do make sacrifices, or sacrifices were made to get there and to have and to do what we do, right? I mean, I don't see how that's a question. I know it's a question. I know it's a question in a lot of groups. I know there are a lot of people who just don't understand it, but I have a hard time understanding how people don't see that it's both. Just like I tell my kiddo all the time, you can be happy about something and sad about something. You can be happy for your friend that they got X, Y, and Z, and you can be sad for yourself that you didn't get X, Y, and Z. Both of those can coexist in your little body, and it feels weird, and it's like a point of tension, and you don't really know, and but they coexist. I feel it's this, yeah.
Maybe you just need to read Nikki Truesdale's book because anyone can homeschool, Amanda.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's the
if I
key.
ha exactly, if I hand it over to God, it'll be fine. I might have to stop and pray in weird random places with strangers, but it's gonna be fine.
I think, okay, so aside, when my daughter was doing the farmer's market in South Carolina, which was the loveliest group of people you will ever meet in your entire life, like so nice. And she loved it. And it was a great experience. They started before the farmer's market opened at 8. At about 7:45, they would have prayer circle. It was led by the sweetest women, but it has a very doubtful Jew. She would sit there and be like, I just don't get it. Oh, and it happened next to her booth. Just the way it worked, it was like, and when prayer circle was really big, it would like encroach on her booth, which she didn't mind, but she was just sitting there like, oh, okay. And they would all pray to God that they would sell out at the farmer's market. And like my child is, the great grandchild of Holocaust survivors. And she's like, Jews were being mass exterminated and praying for survival. And those prayers weren't answered, but God cares that your wooden spoons sell out at the farmer's market. You know what I mean? Like she would just be like, oh my gosh, you big gist. So yeah, she had a hard time with it sometimes during the week, or she would just sit there and be like, all right, then. But
Yeah.
it's interesting, like how people perceive that he has answered their prayers when
Oh, yeah.
there's like genocide going on in the world, and he doesn't seem to mind that. But
Yeah, well, no one probably prayed about that. Yeah. None of the right Christians prayed about that, so it
exactly,
didn't get answered.
there you go.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we pretty much established, right, that homeschooling is both a privilege and a sacrifice at the same time. So what like let's have just kind of a general conversation. If you're here, you're listening along, hopefully we hit on everything. If we miss something, by all means, drop us a note on social media, privately, right? Like these are topics that I think need to continue to be conversations as we unpack things, as we grow, as we learn. And I don't think either one of us is claiming to be our final best self. So if you've got other ideas or suggestions, we'd love to hear that. We're both always looking to grow. But kind of along that line of thinking, what do you think are the financial, social, or even logistical barriers that prevent some families from homeschooling?
The first one that comes to mind is single parents, just because I feel like you're already in a different state of mind about surviving as a single parent. All the weight is on you, all the pressure's on you. A lot of single parents don't have financial support or logistical support. And so most single parents have to work. I mean, how many posts do we see from people in our groups who are saying, I've been homeschooling all this time, we're getting a divorce, my kids have to go back to school, or, whatever. So I feel like, to your point before about, when kids are younger, someone still needs to be there. So the response in all the groups is, don't forget, homeschooling doesn't have to take place during 8 to 2 or 8 to 3. And that is very true. You can homeschool in the evening over dinner. You can homeschool on the weekends. But if there's no one available to watch that kid during the day, will you go to a job that is outside of your home? What do you plan to do with that child? And JD Vance told us that, grandparents should step up and help. And I'm like, okay, like again, that's privilege. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has that structure built in that's there for them to be able to tap into that.
Well, yeah. And these days, how many grandparents? I know my parents are still working. My parents are still of an age that they need to be working. They can't be retired and just sitting around helping their grandkids, even if they wanted to.
It's an interesting point, actually, because the other day there was a rally and people were protesting about Social Security outside. So they were mostly older folks who were protesting. And it was like a Friday afternoon. And that was his thing, was like, why aren't these people at work? Don't they have jobs? So they should work instead of collecting Social Security, but then also watch people's kids for them so that they can work. So
Yeah, for free.
that's still happening.
Yeah.
Are there that you can think of, socioeconomic, whatever they might be, that prevent people from homeschooling?
Well, one that I was just thinking of when it comes to kind of socioeconomic status is that even in the most backwards school districts, there is access to free or reduced meals.
Mhm.
And in other places, like in California, in public schools, all meals, like all students get free meals. And so if you are coming from a situation where food insecurity is a real struggle and a real concern, and come on, let's be real, this is a real problem. This is really, especially in the United States, for a developed country, we sure have no issue with lots of people starving. And so if you're a parent who is frequently giving up your meals to make sure that your kids have dinner or to make sure that they get at least 1 or 2 meals on the weekend, I can't imagine a scenario where you're like, you know what? No, I'm not going to send them to school where they know for sure they can get breakfast and lunch for free. I'm going to keep them home with me and we'll all eat 1 meal a day. You're just not going to do that. You're going to make the responsible, caring decision to send your kids to a place where you know for sure they get 2 well-balanced or at least calorie-dense meals a day. And you'd have to be an asshole to be like, you should keep them at home and they'll get a better education. Like, it's fine if they're starving, they'll get a better education. Like, no one learns well when they're hungry.
Right. Yeah, and that's always been my point about cutting school meals when people don't want to fund them is I'm like, how do you break the cycle? There's the whole like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which is ridiculous to begin with. But then it's like, how do you expect people to do that when you're cutting programs that are required when they're hungry and they can't learn at school when they're hungry? It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, there was that show Chopped on Food Network where you get the baskets. Do you ever watch that show?
I've seen it a few times, yeah.
They did one time where they had lunch ladies on, and it was the whole series with lunch ladies. And one of the judges said he critiqued this one woman's meal for it being too pasta heavy. And she was like, yeah, but she said, I know that some of the kids that I feed won't eat again until I see them again the next day. So pasta's cheap and I can give them a whole bunch of it and stay within my budget at the school and hopefully fill their tummies until the next day. So she's like, I go heavy on pasta. And I was just sitting there like, but this is the world we live in. But I think we're also in a position where people refuse to acknowledge that food insecurity is a societal problem as opposed to that individual's laziness or poor planning
Their
or.
moral failings. Somehow, right?
And so I think there's no way to really fix it until you get to that point, because there was a post in one, I'm in a lot of book club groups for historical fiction, just general fiction. I'm in a group called Serious Nonfiction Books, whatever. Somebody posted something today about the gutting of the libraries. It was just the executive order was just signed. And somebody, they were the top commenter that had the most reactions and all this kind of stuff, said, oh, boo hoo. So instead of going to the library, you're going to have to put things on your e-reader, like tell me how hard your life is. And I was like, how do you just assume that everyone has an e-reader and can afford to put books on them without a library, because ebooks are not cheap and all that. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like in what world is a country without libraries that are funded? Great. How is that part of your greatness variation? I don't get that. He thought it was ridiculous that people were upset about libraries. So how do you even begin to have a conversation with people who can't see that?
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. And I don't know about everywhere, but I know our library is full of resources. You have access to computers and computer rooms for doing job interviews and putting your resume together. And we have nonprofits actually in our library that help those who are unhoused. And like the list goes on and on. You can get lunch in the summer. You can get the free lunch for the kids who are on summer break. There are just so many things that happen at your library. And to be like, you don't need that, just buy ebooks. Like how? Have to be so out of touch. But that's the problem. Like
That's
a lot
right.
yeah, a lot of people
Mhm.
who are so incredibly out of touch are the same ones that swear they have no privilege. Because they haven't had to think about those kinds of things. They haven't had to struggle with those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So we talked about a person who's a single parent, but in a world where you've got maybe a stay-at-home parent or a flexible work from home parent, how does that all fit into privilege in your mind?
I think no matter what, it is generally significantly easier to homeschool if one of the two responsible adults in the home is at home all of the time. So not actually looking necessarily at the flexible work from home parent, but especially with the stay at home parent, the reality is that that makes it easier. Now, I know for me, I often say I'm a stay at home parent, and for the most part, I am a stay at home parent. We are fortunate enough that my husband makes enough money for us to be able to live comfortably that way, right? If you listen to us, you know that. We do definitely, we live in a 2-bedroom place. We have all old cars. We don't have any new cars. And we make those kinds of decisions because we're in a position where I am disabled. I can work a part-time job for a very short period of time if I need to. And I have had to do that when my husband gets laid off. In California, you get like $1,800 a month in unemployment. That doesn't really pay for anything in the state of California. And so definitely there have been times when I have gone to work and gotten a part-time job just to help make ends meet and to help carry us through until he gets another job with full benefits and all of that kind of stuff. But that's really hard for me to do. And the reality is my husband makes too much money for me to qualify for any sort of actual financial assistance as a disabled person. So in a lot of families, that right there already puts you at a real struggle point, right? And a lot of people, it's a real problem in the United States. Like being disabled isn't enough to mean you qualify for any sort of assistance beyond a placard that says you don't have to walk such long distances. Like it's really hard to get any kind of actual help. The flip side is if you can't work and you're at home anyway, at least you're not like, well, we could be making this money if I went back to work, right? So there's that. You have other families too where like you get to make that choice, right? You get to make the choice of I want to be a stay-at-home parent and these are the decisions we're going to make to set our family up for that and to make it work. And not everyone can do that. My family definitely, when I was growing up, both of my parents worked. That was an absolute necessity. And it just so happened when I was in high school that my mom got hurt on the job. She was a juvenile detention officer and she got hurt quite badly. And that changed things in our family a lot. And we had to move. We had to move into a smaller house. And there were just a lot of changes in our life that had to happen because she found herself in this group of people who really needed 2 incomes, but could no longer, the family could no longer have 2 incomes and how you make that work. So again, it's that thing. It is privilege to be able to be in that space and make ends meet in one way or another, but it's not easy. This is one of those examples where sometimes there is a lot of sacrifice that has to be made. And then the flip side is in this day and age, post-pandemic or after the worst of the pandemic, depending on where you fall on your beliefs around that, a lot more places are offering these flexible work from home situations. And I think it's hard to find those jobs if you weren't already there. If you were there and your company sent you home and then they never made you go back, that's one thing. I see all the time in moms groups where moms are like, where are legit work from home jobs? Right? Like
There's so many scams.
yeah, not the scams, not the buy all of this stuff and then sell it to your friends. But if you can find those, and there are more of them, it's a real privilege that it's a pretty new and hopefully it stays. But but again, it's a privilege, but it's also a sacrifice. It's hard to work from home.
Yeah. I think the key for me is whether you're a single parent, working from home, working out of the home, whatever the case is. I think there's so many people that are in survival mood in the US right now, more than there have been in a while, but it has been a long running issue. And I know for us, I spent about 2 to 3 years in survival mode when my husband was sick. And there was tremendous financial insecurity because my husband, even though I pick up part-time jobs and do my little things here, they're like, he beyond dominates my income and is the breadwinner of our family. And so there was tremendous insecurity when he was sick. And what do we do if he doesn't survive? And all of this. He had 2 types of cancer, one of which was chemo resistant. He had a stem cell transplant. He was in the ICU for 26 days. I had 3 small kids. And what the hell do I do if something happens to my husband? I mean, I could go back to work, but I'm not going to make what he makes. It was really scary. And when I look back on that time period, not just financially, but just in general, I was surviving from not even day to day, from 1 minute to the next minute. I mean, I spent that full 2 to 3 years holding on by my fingernails. It was so funny because we were very private about what was going on, mainly so we could keep everything as quote unquote normal as possible for my kids. And so people who didn't know, I would see them and they'd be like, "You look great. You're so thin," because it's Miami and thinness is the only thing that's desirable about you in some circles. And I'd be sitting there like, "Huh?" So in the meantime, I'd be like, "That's because my nerves are so freaking frayed that I can barely function." And so I'm like, when you're in that mode of just barely surviving, the thought of taking on homeschooling, researching curriculums, having an extra expense, having to divide your time in an extra way, and your survival mode could be related to anything. It could be related to the relationship that you're in doesn't feel stable. It could be you're caring for an elderly parent. It could be chronic illness. It could be financial insecurity. It could be, I mean, in the US right now, you could be an LGBTQ plus family. It could be anything where you're literally just hanging on day by day. And when you're in that mode, the thought of taking on one more thing is enough to just send you over the edge.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so true. And I think it kind of leads into one of our other questions. So I'll just jump ahead a minute. We said, how do we validate the hard work and sacrifices of homeschooling parents while still acknowledging privilege? And, for me, that's kind of one of those, I don't, I don't know how we do that because we still haven't figured out how to value stay-at-home parents. Sometimes it really is this easy, this is what we're going to do because, like we can do that. And in the most privileged circles, it's that simple. But even before I was disabled and unable to work, when my husband and I first met, we were both making 6 figures. We were both working these careers that meant we worked 60 to 70 hours a week. And we lived this like truly yuppie life. And that's fine. We had both worked hard to get there. I was the first person in my family to get a college degree. My husband was, he might have been the first in his family, but he was, definitely an immigrant family. He moved to the United States. He's a naturalized citizen. We both worked really hard to get there. The reality is we had to have a real honest conversation between the two of us when we talked about even potentially spending our lives together of like, what does this look like if we want to start a family, if we want to hitch our horses and move forward in life together? Are we going to work days, evenings, and weekends while having kids? Do we want nannies that raise our kids? Do we want to make the sacrifice? And, you know, for us, the idea was that it would probably be me because I was interested in that. I wanted to be with my kids and I wanted to try that. And I'll be fully transparent. I was not sure it would work. I wanted to try it. But I had seen so many of my girlfriends who took their maternity leave and they were like itching to get back to work. Like, absolutely, like, this is not for me. I'm coming back. Thought maybe I'd do the stay-at-home parent thing. Not too hard, too stressful. Not for me. I want work and I will pay for the nanny. Right. So I wasn't sure where we would come down on it. Ultimately, I really love it. And it's worked for us. And it's a good thing it's worked for us because I can't go back to work. I couldn't put in those kinds of hours if I had to. And at some point, something might happen in our lives where I do have to try to find a way to work and support myself. And I don't know what that's going to look like as a disabled American, especially with all the things that are going on in the world and the United States right now. But if we can't even get to the point where we appreciate the stay-at-home parent, whether that's the mom or the dad or the second mom, whatever that looks like, how do we get to the point where we're like, oh yeah, homeschool parenting is totally like, that's awesome. We support that instead of, because I mean, come on. How often in groups do you hear people say, like, well, just send them back to school and go to work? No. If that's the answer, like, just send them back to school and go to work. Like, clearly, we don't value what you're doing with your time and your effort there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really, really hard. I did laugh when you said that you were both working and you referred to yourself as yuppies because now the term is dinks. Have you heard this?
I haven't heard it. I'm too
Low
old.
income, no kids. I, and sometimes I'll see people out and I'll see them and I go, oh, I think that's dink life. Like, I mean, I have a 17-year-old. It's been a really long time since we've been double income, no kids people. And I wouldn't trade my kids for anything in the world. But at the same time, I'm like, look at that. Look at what they're spending their money on, or look at how they spend their Saturday.
All right, so we have lots more to talk about. As you know us, you know that. But we do want to take a quick moment to invite you to join our Patreon. So we have a Patreon account and we have all of these levels of membership support, right? It's a great way to support independent creators. A lot of your favorite creators have these kinds of accounts, whether it's here at Patreon or Substack or whatever. We really appreciate it. You can support on Patreon and just let those independent creators know, like, hey, especially in this time, in this crazy situation, we really appreciate what you're doing and we appreciate the content you're putting out there. It's nice. It feels good to know that people support it in that way. So we have a few different levels of support. There's everything from just like, thank you for the podcast, to the next one up is it comes with a monthly unit study, which is really great. Its own voices. It's got lots of easy to click links that we've done all the vetting on. So it'll make your life easier. That's always the goal, right? We don't want to put anything out there that's like, oh my God, how much more work do you expect me to do? And then our top level also comes with all of those other things, plus 2 live meetings a month. So we have a monthly Q&A where you can come and ask really specific questions. And then we also have a grown-up gathering, which is where we just really work to build community with fellow like-minded grown-ups. Of course, we're homeschoolers, but we don't really come as parents and homeschoolers first. We come as people who are looking for friends and, just community. And it's a really nice kind of just, social opportunity, low key. You can come as you are with whatever drink you want, and we're happy to welcome you. So we'll have the link in the show notes, and you can also find it in our different bios and things on social media. But if you're having problems finding it, definitely shoot us a message. We are happy to point you in the right direction. And then we will have a coupon code. It changes, right? It varies, but we'll try to make sure that there's one you can easily find in the show notes. You can copy it and get a discount on your first month. We would love to see you there. I know it sounds kind of silly, but yeah, we really would, right? We're there every other week, and we'd love for you to be there too.
No, it's true. I mean, I was thinking when you say like the people, like the creators really appreciate that support. And I was thinking, that little quote that goes around at the holidays that's like, Amazon doesn't do a happy dance when you order from them, but I do, and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's so true. Like, whichever one of us sees it first come through when we get a new subscriber, we like send you, hey, new person on Patreon. Like, we get super excited. So it's not you're not overstating the truth there.
No, it's so true. We're always like, oh, did you see there's a new person on Patreon? Oh, we got another sale on Teachers Pay Teachers. We're always sending those back and forth because it really does make us happy. It still kind of blows my mind that, like, this is happening, this is working, and people are, they're here and they're happy to be here. It's a whole thing. So, all right. Anyway, back to the topic. So we're talking about this idea of privilege and like acknowledging the amount of privilege we have to be able to homeschool. With that said, I think we can't have this conversation without also talking about how does privilege affect curriculum choices, extracurricular opportunities, and even educational outcomes in homeschooling. I mean, we can talk about the front end of it all we want, but the actual doing of it, what does that look like and how does privilege play in? And I think it is a real challenge because there are some, not a lot, not as many as there should be. There are some completely free options out there. Off the top of my head, Khan Academy is a really solid, completely free option, but it is not going to work for everyone. It's video lessons. It's all on the computer, which means you have to have consistent internet access. You've got to have decent Wi-Fi. You have to have a computer or a smart device, which is not something that everyone can have. And many people cannot have a computer for each kid to make sure that they can each be doing it at the same time, right? There's a lot of privilege wrapped up in even using the free resources like that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm the first one to say, when people say, how much does homeschooling cost? I'll be the first one to be like, you can homeschool with a library card, right? I mean, provided that we have libraries.
Yeah.
I need to stop saying that. I feel like
Yeah.
every time we talk, like a couple of weeks ago, we talked about like the Department of Education, and that was the first hack. And now this week we've had the second hack of the Department of Education. But it's like every time we come and we're talking about resources, I'm like, well, that used to be the case. So yeah, in theory, you can homeschool with nothing more than a library card. It is 100% possible. Does it make it easy? No. To your point, you either need to be able to get to the library, and transportation and reliable transportation and the cost of transportation can sometimes be an issue for people, or you need to be able to access the library from home through computer, Wi-Fi, etc. But I mean, in theory, yes, you can learn everything you need to learn through a library system because you can transfer books and they've got services there and all kinds of programming and stuff like that. But it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't mean that it's accessible. And I think the less funding that you have for your homeschool, the more effort. It's a balanced scale situation where the less funding you have, the more you're going to have to be putting things together, the more you're going to have to be connecting the dots, creating things, stuff like that. For me, like I have a kid who's super advanced at math. I would never be able to teach this kid math ever. There's no way. He's light years beyond where I am in math. And so I pay someone to do that. What would his journey look like if I couldn't afford to do that? It would look different. I'm not sure what, I'd be completely honest, I'm not sure what I can do. I mean, maybe I've got a like my strength is history. Maybe I could lean in with another homeschool parent and caregiver and say, hey, I will gladly teach your kids history since you've mentioned that you find it dull as toast. Can you teach my kid math since that's your strong suit? I mean, but again, that's right. It's, and then we're coordinating and, oh, my kid's sick this week, so let's do next week. And okay, well, now they're 2 weeks behind. And it's not easy. It can be done, but it's not easy. And as I brought up before, if you're in that survival mode and now you've been given 10 more things to do, it's like enough already. It's just, it's, there's only so much before the ship sinks.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that same kind of thing applies to, co-ops and drop-off classes and things like that. You have there are a lot of options out there. Now, those options definitely become fewer, and in some cases, very few, if you really want it to be secular and progressive and things like that. But there are a lot of different types of options out there. And you have free co-ops, which in theory, great. We've recently joined a fun free co-op play date kind of thing. And the person just occasionally asks for us to help supply materials. And some of them cost money and some of them are like toilet paper rolls and paper towel rolls. And you probably, no matter what your situation is, have some toilet paper rolls laying around that you can donate. So you're helping give. But the reality is they don't happen right by our home. So you have the financial cost of driving, get the gas to get there, of taking the time. For me personally, I can't easily drive. It's becoming harder and harder for me with the health things that I have going on. And we're super limited. We can't get to about 60% of those play dates because I can't get us there. And that's one of those things of privilege that I think a lot of people, they forget. It's not a big deal for them to get in the car and drive across town to get to a co-op, but it's a big deal for me. Then you have other co-ops where it's not free, but it can be free if you help teach. There are lots of those out there. Well, if you're a teacher, then it's free. Great. I don't have the energy. There is no way I can teach someone else's kids or a group of kids so that my kiddo can be there for free. So again, that's this huge place of privilege. And hopefully, if you're in the right kind of co-ops and in the right groups, that's something that you can go to the organizer and say, look, these are my limitations. What can we work out? What can we make work? And hopefully, if you're listening to us and you organize a co-op, you're thinking like, cool, maybe I haven't offered that yet, but maybe I need to be aware of that. In my efforts to be really inclusive, I sort of forgot that energy can be really limited for some people. And how am I going to adjust to take that into consideration for the families where that matters? I just feel like there are so many ways that, and we don't know, right? We've said that many times on this podcast. Like, you can't do better until you know better. But sometimes you need people in your circle to say, hey, have you ever thought about the fact that not everyone has the same amount of energy? And that's how this might look like in their attempt to participate here or coordinate there. And I'll be totally honest, I'm in the same boat as Megan. There are plenty of things where I outsource because that's what I have the energy for. And again, we're fortunate enough that most of the time I can afford to make that happen. One of the trade-offs for that is I do afford to make that happen by being part of a homeschool charter program in the state of California with funding. And that does mean that we do annual testing and we have to have some meetings and things like that. But it gives me thousands of dollars that I can't easily earn myself, that I can put towards classes that I know my kiddo really wants to do, drop off classes and things like that, that would be pretty hard to fit into our budget on a regular basis without that extra funding. So again, it's those trade-offs and what you're able and willing to do.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, even some of the programs that my kids are in, there's like a pay what you can type of function where there's a threshold. And so
Yeah.
in order to participate seamlessly, here's the threshold. But then at checkout, there's like a contribute to the pay what you can additional. And then there's the ability for people to go in and apply and say, I can afford this much. Is there overage? And so then the people who've put in a little bit extra are compensating below. There's a balance there, right? Where some people who've paid a little bit over can help people who are a little bit short. So, but how many people who can pay over are putting it in? And it's not an ideal system, but it's better than nothing, right? So if you are running a program, it's better than nothing. There are some opportunities, but again, it's work. It's work to try to pull all that stuff together, and everything is just 10 extra steps then. Instead of being able to seamlessly enroll your kid in this program, it's asking and, oh, now we need documents from you to prove the thing and all that kind of stuff to prove your income. And we need a letter of reference or whatever it is, like all of it's extra work. And so if you're able to homeschool without having to do that, there's an element of privilege there.
And, I think too, you can't understate, ego's not even the right word for it. In the United States, especially, there's this mentality, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you should be able to take care of this yourself. And if you can't afford it yourself, then you don't deserve to participate. And it takes a lot, even when you're in that position where for things beyond your control, whatever it is, you're recently separated, you've had a major health crisis, whatever the situation is, it takes so much swallowing your pride, and it shouldn't, right? I'm not saying that it should, because it's part of this twisted American bootstrap mentality that we have, but you have to swallow your pride so much to even look and see if the program offers a scholarship or if they offer some kind of pay as you can, sliding scale or whatever, and then applying for it. And I would love to see us find a way, especially in this progressive group that we're a part of helping lessen that and normalizing a lot of that and embracing this idea of, like, when you're in a position to be able to put more towards the scholarship fund or the pay as you can fund, do that. And when you're the one that's in the position where you need the extra help, do that. Let's normalize these things. No one feels like, oh, well, my kid's the one that's always on scholarship. I'm not advocating taking resources from people who really need it, but this, like, not tapping into those resources that are available, it does exacerbate the stigma around those resources. I think it's one of those things when we have the privilege and we need to help combat that, the stigma and just all of the things around it, right, that are baked into these programs that are there to help and shouldn't. It should just be helped.
And I think if you do need support at some point and to utilize a program for support too, to realize that might not always be in that position. And you might in the future be on the flip side of that. So when my youngest was in preschool, that's when my husband was sick. And he loved school. I mean, loved school so much. And I was at the point where I'm like, I'm going to have to take him out of preschool. I mean, he was going to the synagogue preschool, not cheap. Preschool is never cheap. Then the Jewish preschools are like, and I was like, I'm going to have to take him out of school. And we found a way where he got to stay in school and I got support, which was unheard of because we lived in a very affluent area and no one was needing it, asking for it, etc. But I just felt such insecurity with like, I didn't spend a penny that didn't need to be spent because I didn't know what was happening with my husband. We were incurring medical debt, like all this stuff. And to this day, the kid's 13, I still put money into the donation fund at the preschool because once we got leveled out again, I was like, okay. And it was funny because maybe a year or so ago when we were doing taxes, my husband was like, are we still sending money to them? Like, and I was like, yeah, because they helped us when we needed help. And he goes, we've probably paid back what you, and I'm like, it's not about that. Not about that at all. And so, yeah, we're not sending a fortune, but I'm still every month a check goes out. It's just on an automatic payment because I can now. And so, don't feel bad. I mean, at that time I had no choice. And so it was that or devastate my kid. And so I did it. And now I'm on the other side and I can help. So use it. If you need it, use it. That's what things are there for. Or just raise your hand and ask.
And if you're listening and you're feeling really stuck, send us a message. We'll see what we can do. We'll see where we can help connect people. Like I grew up on free and reduced lunch off and on throughout my childhood. There's no shame in that. As an adult, I have 100% been at points in my life where I needed to utilize a food bank. I have used SNAP benefits. I have used WIC. I know they're not easy. They are not intuitive. It's hard to figure it out. There are lots of tricks to it. We can help. We can help find other people. We can get some conversations going. If you're in that place and you're like, I think I need to utilize these benefits, but I don't know where to start. There's not enough help there, but the help that is there, use it, utilize it.
It's like everything else that we talk about where we say like by not talking about it, it gives it more power. So it's like, and everybody has the right to handle their own challenges exactly the way they want to. I'm not saying like, how dare you not speak about the hardest thing you're going through. I mean, I just said that when my husband was sick, we told almost no one. Now we talk about it. But at the time, it was like, I just went into my little shell and was like, just in survival mode. But, I feel like when women talk about fertility issues, miscarriages, things like that, there's plenty of people who are like, this is only happening to me. And logically, you freaking know that's not true, but it doesn't matter when you're in it and you're feeling alone or you're struggling with X or you're struggling with Y. Just talking about it helps.
That's it. When you talk about it, it gives it less power, right? It normalizes it and it gives it the stigma and all of it. It gives it less power. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. So yes, we'd be happy to have a conversation. Talk to us. So before we wind down for today, we'd love to invite you to join our Facebook community. Speaking of building community and raising these sorts of questions and topics and things like that, if you're feeling alone as a secular, progressive homeschooler, we have a treat for you. We literally have thousands of supportive, kind, like-minded homeschool parents and caregivers in our group. It's this lovely little corner of the internet where you can come hang out with us. There's a link in our show notes, but you can also just find us by searching Homeschool Moms Unfiltered and looking for groups on Facebook. We are there and we would love to welcome you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that wraps up our episode for the day. We usually close out with a mantra. I'm going to be honest. We couldn't decide. We got it down to 2 and we couldn't decide between the 2. So I'm just going to read both of them and you pick the one that most works for you this week and run with it. So the first one is, homeschooling is both a privilege and a responsibility. Honor it by making space for those who dream of the same opportunity. And the second one is, privilege doesn't erase hard work. It just means the door was open for you. Don't slam it shut behind you.
Right.
Don't be the asshole who slams it shut behind you. Keep the door open for the next person. Maybe reach a hand back and help them a little.
Imagine.
Be said. Yep.
Imagine that world. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. And until next time, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.